They told me I'd end up forgotten, alone, found days later by a neighbor who complained about the smell. Instead, they were the ones standing in my living room, silent, stunned, watching me smile. If you're here, let me just say this up front. This isn't a sweet story. It's not tidy, and I'm not sorry. Hi, I'm Eleanor Whitman. I'm 68 years old, and I've officially reached the age where people stop pretending they don't underestimate you. I'm telling you this out loud, the way I'd say it to a stranger sitting next to me on a long flight, because that's how this story lives, in the pauses, the swallowed words, the things I didn't say for decades. This all started with a sentence I heard by accident. I wasn't supposed to hear it. That's important. I was standing in the hallway outside my daughter's kitchen, holding a pie I'd baked myself, still warm through the foil, burning my palms just a little. I remember that detail because pain has a way of sharpening memory. I'd come early, like always, because being useful was the only way I knew how to stay welcome. And then I heard my son laugh. Not a big laugh, a short one, dismissive. "She's going to die alone, you know," he said. "Mom, she's impossible." There was a pause. Then my daughter sighed, the way people do when they want to sound compassionate without actually being kind. "Well," she said, "she kind of already is." I stood there frozen, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the clink of ice in a glass, my own heartbeat loud in my ears. No one noticed I hadn't knocked. No one noticed I'd stopped breathing. I remember thinking, very calmly, so this is what they say when I'm not in the room. I didn't cry, not then. I adjusted my grip on the pie, waited a full 10 seconds, counted them, and then knocked like I always did. Light, polite, easy to ignore. When they turned and saw me, the room shifted. Smiles snapped into place like masks. My daughter rushed over, too loud, too cheerful. "Mom, you're early." I smiled back. I've been practicing that smile my whole life. "Oh, am I said. I didn't want to be a bother. That was the first lie of many. I went home that night and sat alone at my kitchen table, the leftovers neatly packed, the silence pressing in on me from every direction. The house felt different after that, smaller, like it had overheard the conversation too. I kept replaying the words in my head. She's impossible. She's already alone. I'd been married once, widowed at 51. No scandal there, just time and a heart attack, and a man who never liked doctors. After that, I did what women like me are trained to do. I shrank. I didn't want to be too much. I didn't want to burden my children with my grief, my needs, my presence. Apparently, I'd succeeded a little too well. Weeks passed, then months. Calls became shorter. Invitations felt obligatory. I noticed how often plans changed last minute, how often I was told, "You wouldn't enjoy it anyway." I started being introduced as my mom instead of Eleanor, like I'd lost the right to a name. And something in me, something old and tired and quietly furious, woke up. I didn't confront them. That's not my style. Not yet. Instead, I planned a party. The idea came to me one night while I was folding laundry, listening to the radio low, the house smelling faintly of detergent and dust. The announcer was talking about some celebrity birthday bash, champagne towers, live music, the works. I laughed out loud. The sound surprised me. What if I threw the party of the year? I pictured my living room, usually so careful and muted, full of people, real laughter, music that wasn't chosen to offend no one, tables crowded with food I loved, not food I thought I should serve. And then I pictured my family's faces, confused, curious, slightly threatened. That sealed it. I didn't tell anyone at first, not even my bridge group, though they'd have loved the gossip. I started small, cleaned out closets, repainted the guest room, replaced the couch my late husband picked because it was practical, and bought one in a deep, unapologetic blue. Every change felt rebellious. I booked a local jazz band, hired a caterer who didn't ask me if I was sure about spicy food, ordered real invitations, not emails, not texts, thick paper, heavy envelopes. The header read, "Eleanor Whitman invites you to an evening you won't forget." No explanation, no occasion listed. When I mailed the first batch, my hands were shaking. Not fear, anticipation. My daughter called 2 days later. "A party?" she said, confused. "Mom, what is this for?" I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the backyard where the grass needed mowing and the bird feeder swung gently in the wind. I smiled to myself. You'll see. I wish I could tell you that's when I felt powerful, that I suddenly transformed into some fearless woman who'd been hiding all along. The truth is, I was terrified. Every night before bed, I wondered if they were right, if no one would show, if this would just prove their point, that I was delusional, clinging to relevance like a bad habit. But something kept me going. Maybe spite, maybe curiosity, maybe the simple desire to be seen. The day of the party arrived warm and bright, the kind of day that feels like it's on your side. By late afternoon, my house was unrecognizable. Lights strung across the backyard, music equipment being set up, the smell of garlic and citrus and something sweet in the air. I stood in front of the mirror adjusting the neckline of my dress, a red one, fitted, the kind my daughter once told me was a bit much. Good, I thought. The first guests arrived early, then more, then more. Neighbors I barely knew, old colleagues, friends of friends, people I hadn't seen in years who hugged me like they'd been waiting for permission to come back into my life. By the time my family walked in, fashionably late, the house was already alive. I saw my son stop just inside the door, scanning the room. I saw my daughter's smile falter just a fraction. They weren't prepared, and neither were they prepared for me. I lifted my glass, met my son's eyes across the room, and held his gaze just long enough to make him uncomfortable. This was only the beginning, and if you're wondering whether I planned what came next, let's just say I didn't host this party for forgiveness. I wish I could tell you that once the party started, my nerves vanished and I floated through the evening like some glamorous revenge fairy. That's how people like to imagine these moments. Clean, cinematic, satisfying. What actually happened was messier. I stood near the kitchen island with a drink I kept forgetting to sip, my fingers tight around the glass, listening to the low roar of voices fill my house. Laughter bounced off the walls, real laughter, the kind that carries weight, that says people feel comfortable enough to be unguarded. Every so often, someone would lean in close and say, "Eleanor, this is incredible," or "How did you pull all this together?" And I'd laugh and shrug like it hadn't taken weeks of planning and a lifetime of restraint finally snapping. My family hovered. That's the only word for it, hovered. My daughter Claire kept smoothing her dress and scanning the room like she was looking for exits. My son Michael tried to look relaxed, but his shoulders were too stiff, his smile practiced. They both kept glancing at me, then away, like I was something unfamiliar they hadn't decided how to approach. Good. At one point, Michael came up beside me, close enough that I could smell his cologne, the same brand he'd worn since college. "So," he said, nodding toward the backyard where the band was warming up, "this is big." I turned to him slowly, deliberately, let him feel the pause. "I know. Isn't it nice?" He laughed, but it didn't quite land. "You didn't tell us you knew so many people." I took a sip of my drink then, just to give my hands something to do. "I didn't think I needed permission," I said. There it was, the flicker in his eyes, surprise, maybe guilt, maybe irritation. Hard to tell with him. He's always been good at hiding his real reactions, learned that from his father. "Well," he said, "I just mean, We didn't expect this." I leaned closer, lowered my voice. "Neither did you expect me to hear what you said in Claire's kitchen." His face drained of color so fast it almost startled me. "What?" he said, too quick. I straightened, smiling again, loud and pleasant. "Enjoy the party, sweetheart." And I walked away before he could respond. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Part of me wanted to hide in the bathroom and lock the door. Another part, the part I'd been ignoring for decades, felt tall, solid, unmovable. I didn't confront Claire right away. I wanted to watch her first. She made her rounds like a politician, laughing too loudly, touching arms, introducing herself as Eleanor's daughter with a strange emphasis, like she was reminding herself of the connection. I noticed how people reacted when they realized who she was. Curious glances, raised eyebrows. Because here's the thing, no one tells you when you get older. People start seeing you more clearly, not less. You just stop being invisible to yourself first. I caught snippets of conversation as I passed through rooms. "Can you believe she put this together? She's got more energy than I do. I had no idea Eleanor was this interesting." That last one hit me right in the chest. Interesting. I'd spent years trying not to be inconvenient, thinking that was the same as being loved. Turns out it just made me easy to overlook. The music started up in the backyard, smooth and rich, the bass vibrating through the floor. Someone dimmed the lights inside, and suddenly my house felt like a place people wanted to be, not just a stop they made out of obligation. Claire finally cornered me near the hallway. "Mom," she said, her voice tight but polite, "can we talk?" I looked at her, really looked at her. She looked tired, older than I remembered, like someone who'd been carrying a story about me that no longer fit. "Of course," I said. "Right now?" She hesitated, glanced around. "Maybe somewhere quieter?" I shook my head gently. "I'm having too much fun." Her lips pressed together. "You're acting different." I laughed softly. "I am different." There was a moment then, just a moment, where I thought she might apologize. I saw it in her eyes, the calculation, the awareness that something had shifted and she didn't know how to control it. Instead, she said, "You could have told us what this was about." I felt something sharp and clean settle in my chest. "I did," I said. "It's about me." She opened her mouth, closed it, then nodded like she was filing the moment away to deal with later. That was Claire, always postponing discomfort even when it mattered. As the night went on, the stories started coming out. People I barely remembered reminded me of things I'd done, things I'd helped with, moments I'd forgotten because no one else had ever brought them up again. "You stayed with me all night at the hospital," one woman said, squeezing my hand. "You told me not to quit. I didn't. I'm still here because of that." I was stunned, humbled, angry with myself for ever believing the version of me my family had reduced to a punchline. Near midnight, when the wine had loosened tongues and the music slowed, I clinked my glass. The room quieted. I hadn't planned a speech, I swear that part is true. But once everyone was looking at me, once I had them, really had them, I knew I couldn't let the moment pass. "I just want to say something," I said, my voice steady despite the way my hands trembled. "For a long time, I thought I was done, finished, that the best parts of my life were behind me." I glanced at my children. They were watching now, really watching. But tonight reminded me that being older doesn't mean being irrelevant, and being quiet doesn't mean being empty. There was a beat of silence, then applause, real applause, not polite, warm. I saw Claire blink hard. I saw Michael look down to his shoes. And in that moment, I realized something important. This party wasn't the revenge. It was the invitation. The real reckoning was still coming. The funny thing about reclaiming your life at 68 is that people assume it's a phase. That's what they saw in my eyes after the party, after the speeches, after the new lipstick and the late dinners and the laughter that came easier than it had in years. They smiled indulgently, the way you do at a child who's discovered a new hobby. Good for her, their looks said. She'll tire herself out soon. Even my family thought that, I think. They were wrong. Daniel and I didn't rush anything. That was part of the magic. We met for dinners that stretched into slow walks, for coffee that turned into shared silences neither of us felt the need to fill. He listened when I spoke, really listened, not with that patient, patronizing tilt of the head people reserve for older women, but with curiosity, respect. One night, sitting across from me in a small restaurant lit by candles and ambition, he said, "You know, Eleanor, you don't act like someone who's afraid of being alone." I set my fork down. That's because I'm not. That truth settled into me then, warm and solid. The real shift came a few weeks later at a family brunch Claire insisted on hosting. She wanted to reconnect, her word, carefully chosen, like everything else she did. I arrived late, on purpose. When I walked in, conversation faltered, not because I was imposing, but because I was unfamiliar. I wasn't dressed like their mother anymore. I wasn't apologizing for taking up space. I kissed cheeks, took my seat, ordered a mimosa without asking if anyone minded. Michael raised his eyebrows. Celebrating something? I smiled. My life. Claire laughed nervously. You're different lately. I met her gaze. I am different. You're just less comfortable with it. That brunch changed the dynamic more than the party ever did, because this time there was no audience, no applause, just the quiet understanding that I wasn't coming back to the version of myself that made them feel superior by comparison. Later that afternoon, as we stood by our cars, Claire said something that finally revealed the truth beneath all her concern. I guess I just always thought you'd need us more. I thought about that, about how carefully I'd shaped my loneliness so it wouldn't inconvenience anyone. I did, I said. You just didn't like how it felt. She nodded, eyes shining, and for the first time she didn't argue. Weeks passed, months. My calendar filled with color, dinners, music nights, a weekend trip I booked without asking anyone's opinion first. Daniel and I grew closer, not desperate, not clinging, but aligned. Two people choosing each other, not because they were afraid of the alternative, but because they liked who they were together. One evening, sitting on my porch with a glass of wine, watching the sky soften into dusk, I thought about that sentence again. She's going to die alone. What a small imagination that took. I may very well die alone. We all do in some way. But I will live surrounded, by choice, by laughter, by rooms full of people who see me not as an obligation, but as a presence. That was the real revenge. Not the party, not the confrontation, not even the newfound attention. It was the quiet, undeniable proof that I was never what they said I was. I wasn't impossible, I wasn't invisible, and I certainly wasn't done. So if anyone ever tells you how your story ends before you finish telling it yourself, throw a party, change the rules, and let them watch.